All right. I want to say greetings, peace to everyone. This is your brother Wujau, Meneb Iry-Maat, and I'm doing this video for the purposes of answering the question in the title of the video, which is, what is HR 40? And now normally I would, I enjoy and encourage, interactive discussions and things, but this particular video, I just want to kind of go over HR 40 and what it is, because in engaging this topic with reparative justice or reparations, HR 40 has come up a lot, and I found myself seeing in the comments that people have been making and in the discussions that some people don't know what HR 40 is, or there's an assumption that HR 40 is reparations itself. And so, so I've tried to clarify it, wherever I've chimed in on the discussion. So I just want to do this video, excuse me, to archive it, this answer into one location to where, people can link to it and share this link just to get a concise description of what HR 40 actually is. All right. So, if you're watching now while I'm live right now, I greatly appreciate it. Make sure that you share the link to those, who've been having this discussion. Please share it. And I will, depending on the comments, I may entertain any questions or concerns in the comments. But I do want to keep this video as brief as I can without skipping anything. All right. So the question is, what is HR 40? And if you notice in the description, I also include an issue, whether or not HR 40 is characterized as being divisive or anti other movements and ideologies. Okay, and there's a reason why I'm including that in this video. All right, but let's start off by going into what HR 40 actually is. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and on the screen you have the website congress.gov. This is the source of information for congressional activities, bills, legislation, etc. It's a website that has a wealth of information dealing with the United States Congress. All right, so this is the page where you will find HR 40, and if you go there, as you can see, you can actually search under the string HR 40, and it will come up. Now, with HR 40, just be in mind, if you do a search for it, you're going to find several search results, because HR 40 has been a bill that's been introduced ever since 1989, and it's been reintroduced every year or every session of Congress since then. Okay, so if you search for HR 40, just keep that in mind, that you're going to see a lot of the results are going to come from the past submissions. All right, so make sure that you're on the latest submission, as you see on the screen. Make sure it says 2019. In this particular case, it is the 116th congressional year or session. All right, so hopefully you all keep that in mind. Now, so let's back up a little bit on HR 40. Just give a very, very, very brief history of HR 40. First of all, the H and the R in HR 40 stands for House of Representatives. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. It's an abbreviation for House of Representatives. And then the number of any bill is a clerical number based on what the clerks assign to the bill. And it could be a recommended or it's done by the clerks. All right. So this is where you get 40 from. Now, this particular bill being called HR 40, the number 40, has a little more significance than your other bills that you may see. All right. Now, when it was introduced in 1989, it was introduced by John Conyers. When he first introduced the bill, the bill was not called HR 40. It was actually called HR 3745. All right. So if you want to look that up, you can search HR 3745, and you'll see that the title of the bill is the same, which is a Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. All right. So it wasn't always called HR 40. All right. So I want to that's just FYI for those who may be researching when it was first introduced by John Conyers. And this was done in January of 1989. It didn't get renamed to HR 40 until 1997. Okay, so again, in 1997, the bill was redesignated as HR 40. And this was done to signify the 40 acres and a mule. Okay, so this is where we have what we see today, HR 40. All right, so just wanted to kind of give a little history of who introduced it, what it was called at first, and why it's called what it's called today. Now, John Conyers has since retired, and the bill is still being advanced or submitted. And this time, as you can see on the screen, it is submitted by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. All right, or Sheila Lee Jackson. I'm not sure which way the hyphenated name would go, but it's being introduced. And this is the last time, most current submission. All right, introduced January 3rd, 2019. But let's get into the bill. I want to just discuss, and it's not very long. When you go to the website, let me get my cursor there. And hopefully you all can read it and see it enough on the screen. I know it may be small. I tried to blow it up a bit so that you can follow along. All right, so it was sponsored by Sheila Jackson Lee, introduced in January 3rd, 2019. It was assigned to the Committee of the House Judiciary, and then it was submitted to a subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Justice. All right. So it is in committee, and that's another thing. What I would encourage people to do, and I won't talk about this on this video, but I would encourage people to actually look up the legislative procedure, the congressional legislative procedure, how bills become laws. All right, and I will do another video in the future to kind of give a summary of that. But nothing beats doing your due diligence and research into that, and I may post some links that will point people in the right direction for that. All right, but what I want to do today is go into what HR 40 actually is. So we had the 116th Congress, the first session, HR 40. So here is the introduction paragraph, which summarizes it beautifully. It says, to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 colonies between 1619 and 1865, and to establish a commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, its subsequent de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against African Americans, and the impact of these forces on living African Americans, to make recommendations to Congress and on appropriate remedies and for other purposes. Now let's just stop there for a minute, because this goes into what I had also additionally pointed out, which is the question: is HR 40 being characterized as being divisive or anti other ideologies and anti other movements? And the reason why I ask that is because the ADOS education and political advocacy movement that people are seeing with the hashtag ADOS, that is spearheaded by Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, people have deflected into a highway of conversations that are talking about whether or not ADOS movement is divisive, and that the shaping and characterization of the ADOS agenda is divisive. These are the things that people are arguing back and forth over. But what's interesting is that because ADOS, even the acronym sets forth a necessary distinction to be made between what's referred to as flat black. It makes a distinction between lineal descendants of the victims of the institution of slavery and all of its vestiges from first, second generation immigrants who would also be called black. So this is where you get this flat black, where everybody who fits a certain look or phenotype that people feel, and they cross it over with the social construct of race, and would be referred to as black. Okay, a distinction must be made because you have to identify claim holders, and we always have to remember that this is a reparative justice claim that's being made. And anytime you make a claim, you have to identify claim holders. All right. And so this is why it's a necessary distinction that must be made. It has nothing to do with people's personal feelings, what you like, what you dislike. This is a matter of legal procedure, a matter of law. All right. It's just that simple. And so people who may not understand that, they see the acronym, this necessary distinction, as being divisive. And that's the core of this divisive talk. And then it has escalated to where, from being divisive in that sense over into being anti other things. Okay, so I want to bring that to the fore, because as we read through HR 40, the same things can be said about HR 40, but it's not. HR 40 has never been characterized, in these conversations at least, it's never been characterized as being divisive, or as people charge ADOS movement as being, too restrictive, too isolated, and it's not dealing with the global argument. Okay, the global claim. So let's just see. So what does it say? It says HR 40 to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 colonies. So HR 40 places this case squarely within the 13 colonies and what became and what is now the United States of America. It does not mention Caribbeans. It does not mention any Caribbean nations. It does not mention any nations on the continent of Africa. It does not mention any European nations on the European continent. Okay. So we have to be clear on that. It rests solely within the confines of the 13 American colonies and the United States of America. All right. But again, HR 40 is not being accused of the same things that ADOS movement is being accused of. So keep that in mind. So then it sets a date range here. It says between 1619 and 1865. And then it goes on, as I already read, to establish a commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, etc., etc. Well, no, let's continue to read. Institution of slavery, its subsequent de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against who? Against African Americans. And the impact of these forces on who? Living African Americans. Okay, now, again, I would like to point out, where are we talking about? We're talking about squarely within the United States of America. And prior to the United States of America, of course, we're talking about the 13 colonies. Now, who are we talking about? We're talking about African Americans. We're not talking about anyone else in terms of the scope of HR 40. All right. Again, although we're reading this, HR 40 has not been characterized in these conversations or charged with being divisive or being separate, a separate thing, or limited, or any of the negative accusations that the ADOS movement has been receiving. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right, we're talking about consistent logic. And then it goes on, in the House of Representatives, and then it gives the sponsorship, etc. All right, so I'm not going to read the names, and then it identifies it as a bill, and then it repeats the exact same paragraph that we've already read. All right, so now I'm going to briefly go through a couple of these sections. So section 1 is the short title, and is the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. Even in the title, it tells you who it's for. It's for African Americans. It's not for Africans of the diaspora. It's not for Caribbean citizens of Caribbean nations. It's not for citizens of the various African nations, or nations on the African continent. All right. So just keep all of this in mind as we briefly continue to go through what HR 40 is. All right. Okay. Findings and purpose. Now, I'm going to come back to this because I want to go to the establishment and duties of section 3, the establishment and duties, what this commission's duties would be. Okay. And the first subsection is A, and it says establishment, and it simply establishes the commission, and from henceforth within this bill is called the commission. All right. Now we get to the duties. So the commission shall perform the following duties. All right. Number 1, identify, compile, and synthesize the relevant corpus of evidentiary documentation of the institution of slavery, which existed where? Within the United States and the colonies that became the United States from 1619 through 1865. The commission's documentation and examination shall include but not be limited to the facts related to, and then it has some subsections addressing that. But what I want to point out again, which is consistent with the characterization of this bill and the scope of the bill that we read earlier, is that it's talking about the institution of slavery, which existed within the United States and the colonies that became the United States between 1619 and 1865. All right. Now, HR 40 is not being attacked or accused by people who wish to have and focus and emphasize the global claim of the atrocities of the African Holocaust, as we know as the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. Now, when ADOS is a part of the conversation, it is being criticized for not having a global character, not having a worldwide, global, diasporic character to it. All right. But when HR 40 comes up in the conversation, it is not given that same criticism. And so this is what I'm pointing out, that we have inconsistent logic that's at play here. And there's a reason why it's inconsistent. There's a reason why HR 40 is not characterized in such a way, and the ADOS movement, advocacy movement is. But we'll get to that in a second. And that deserves its own discussion as well. And I won't dive too far into it, but it's worth mentioning. So, so here's what it is. The documentation examination is digging out or bring the facts related to. It says A, the capture and procurement of Africans, the transport of Africans to where? The United States and the colonies that became the United States for the purposes of enslavement, including their treatment during transport. Notice it doesn't say the Caribbeans. All right. HR 40 does not include the Caribbeans. All right. B, the sale and acquisition of Africans as chattel property in interstate and intrastate commerce. The treatment of African slaves in where? The colonies and the United States, including the deprivation of their freedom, exploitation of their labor, and destruction of their culture, language, religion, and families. But where again? In the colonies and the United States. All right. The extensive denial of humanity, sexual abuse, and chattelization of persons. All right. Those are the 5 subsections of section 1. Now 2, the role in which the federal and state governments of who? The United States supported the institution of slavery in constitutional and statutory provisions, including the extent to which such governments prevented, opposed, and restricted efforts to formally enslave Africans and their descendants to repatriate to their homeland. Okay, again, what I'm doing, I'm emphasizing the consistency of the scope of HR 40 being limited to a case here in the United States of America, which is specific, and is to a specific group of people that this bill refers to as African Americans. So again, we're dealing with a specific justice claim on behalf of a specific group of people targeting a specific offender or perpetrator. All right. Keep that in mind. That sounds very familiar because when you go to the ADOS website, you will see that the ADOS is saying the exact same thing. All right. 3, the federal and state laws that discriminated against formerly enslaved Africans and their descendants who were deemed United States citizens from 1868 to the present. So who is this talking about as far as African Americans? Now we're getting some more details about this. So formerly enslaved Africans and their descendants who were deemed United States citizens from 1868 to the present. Now, I want to pause here for a second because when we talk about ADOS, we're talking about an acronym. You know, the acronym serves a purpose for the education and political advocacy movement, you know, in the form of a hashtag, but it also identifies this distinction. And so we have ADOS. So the A stands for American. So it's talking about what we see here, United States citizens. Anyone looks up the word American, it is understood not to be talking about the Americas in general. That's ambiguous, it's vague. It's very specific. It's talking about the citizens of the United States of America. All right, that's what the A stands for. And then the D stands for descendants. It's talking about lineal descendants. What do we have here? Descendants. Okay, descendants of who? Enslaved Africans. So when we have the O is of, and then the S is speaking about the institution of slavery. So ADOS stands for, as the website clearly shows, the American descendants of slavery, because it wants to emphasize the institution and its vestiges. So when you say lineal descendants, You're not a descendant of an institution. You're descendants of victims of the institution and its vestiges. And these victims are understood to be enslaved Africans. All of this can't be included in an acronym. So I see people fuss about the acronym, not understanding that it's simply an acronym, a short form, which is what acronyms are for, to shape an idea. But this is what it's meant. This is how it's defined. So people are fussing about whether it should be the A should stand for Africans, or should we include African in the acronym, or should we say enslaved Africans versus slaves, because slaves imply property and slaves holds on to our the dignity or the humanity. Those are peripheral, irrelevant arguments and conversations that only serve the purpose to derail the push for the need for reparative justice. And so a lot of people are falling for the distractive conversations. And so again, I'm pointing out what is HR 40 in this video to show you how our distractions have manifested so much that it results in us even having inconsistent logic, which proves the point. Because nobody says these things about HR 40, but everybody has criticism for the ADOS movement that says the exact same thing. And I'm just pointing these things out. So let's just continue. Number 4, other forms of discrimination in public and private sectors against freed African slaves and their descendants who were deemed United States citizens from 1868 to the present, including redlining, educational funding discrepancies, and predatory financial practices. So again, it's talking about descendants of enslaved Africans. But this is at a point in time, it says from 1868 to the present. So the discrimination forms. Again, we're talking about the same scope, the same limited or group of people. Okay. It says the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery. Here we see this phrase again, institution of slavery. ADOS, S stands for slavery, speaking about the institution. All right. It's fully in line with what we're reading here in HR 40. All right. I just got to keep pointing it out. And the matters described in paragraphs 1 through 5, you might as well say 1 through 6. Okay. On living African Americans and on society in the United States. There is a distinct group being named here, African Americans. All right, just got to keep pointing this out. 6, recommend appropriate ways to educate the American public on the commission's findings. 7, recommend appropriate remedies in consideration of the commission's findings on matters described in paragraphs 1 through 6. In making such recommendations, the commission shall address, among other issues, the following questions. So let's see what some of these questions are. And I'll try to read through them quickly. A, how such recommendations comport to international standards of remedy for wrongs and injuries caused by the state that include full reparations and special measures as understood by various relevant international protocols, laws, and findings. Basically, this one is saying how the recommendations put forth by this commission, how do they compare up to what's been done and understood internationally? And by the way, just as an FYI, the United States of America has been a leader in reparative justice and justice claims on human rights violations around the world. Okay, just keep that in mind. The United States has been directly involved in seeking justice for others around the world when it comes to human rights violations. All right. So we have a little bit of hypocrisy here where the United States will go out of its way to even fund and do research on other justice claims around the world, but not internally to its own domestic population. Okay, keep that in mind. So we have quite a bit of hypocrisy going on. B, how the government of the United States will offer a formal apology on behalf of the people of the United States for the perpetration of gross human rights violations, a crime against humanity of African slaves and their descendants. How federal laws and policies that continue to disproportionately and negatively affect African Americans as a group, and those that perpetuate the lingering effects materially and psychosocial can be eliminated. Again, over and over and over again, this bill is only dealing with African Americans, dealing with a specific group of people. It's not talking about the entire diaspora of people of African descent. And again, HR 40 is never criticized for this. All right. So much so, we have inconsistent logic within the same person. We'll have a person who will say that they support fully HR 40, and they will encourage people to push HR 40. HR 40, HR 40. Call your congressman. Push HR 40. I'm in support of HR 40. This is what you hear people say. But then they will also say things like ADOS, the acronym, and what's going on is being divisive. How come it can't be this, that, and the third? So right there, you have a split in logic. You have an inconsistent logic. And there's reasons for this. And like I said, that's for another show. Where we leave off. Okay, how the injuries resulting from matters described in paragraphs 1 through 6 can be reversed and provide appropriate policies, programs, projects, and recommendations for the purpose of reversing the injuries. This sounds very much similar to the Black Agenda on the ADOS 101 website. Policies and programs and set-asides that specifically addresses the injuries that's described even in this bill. And so again, what I'm pointing out is that ADOS is in full alignment with this bill. All right. E, how in consideration of Commission's finding, any form of compensation to the descendants of enslaved Africans is calculated. Now, E is interesting because ADOS movement has scholars and professionals, trained professionals, who are not waiting for Congress to enact this bill to form a commission to figure this stuff out. ADOS as an advocacy movement is actually in the business of doing this work and educating people on it. All right. Right now, for the past 2 years. I'll give you one person in particular. Dr. William Darity. Dr. William Darity. Some people may know him as Sandy Darity. Dr. Sandy Darity has written extensively on this very point of E and other things. Okay, so look him up. He has lectures, from years ago leading up to the present. Matter of fact, on C-SPAN, he just now had a interview answering phone call questions and being interviewed about this very, very topic. Okay, he has an upcoming book coming out, I believe, he and his wife, about these particular topics. All right, I'm not sure how old that particular video is, but I believe it's recent. But you can check it out. It's on C-SPAN. All right. F, what form of compensation should be awarded, through what instrumentalities, and who would be eligible for such compensation? Again, these things are already been worked on and being worked on. No one's waiting. All right. Fully in alignment with what ADOS is advocating and what ADOS as a movement is doing, or the advocates themselves are actually doing. G, how is the consideration of commission findings and other forms of rehabilitation and restitution to African descendants is warranted, and what form and scope do those measures should take? All of these things are being done and worked on. The shaping of how reparations look is being done and crystallized, because now, unlike in the 80s or the 90s, now we have the means to extract this data, the means to extract the evidentiary documentation, to actually examine, to actually diagnose these things. Okay, and then finally, the duties of this commission is to report to Congress. So the commission shall submit a written report of its findings, recommendations to Congress no later than the date, which is 1 year after the date of the first meeting of the commission held pursuant to Section 4C. Let's just skip to Section 4C. It says the first meeting, the president shall call the first meeting of the commission within 120 days after the date of enactment of this act, or within 30 days after the date on which legislation is enacted making appropriations to carry out this act, whichever date is later. Okay, so in other words, they can't sit on it, which is good. They can't delay. They can't use this as a stalling tactic. They're putting limitations on at least when this report should be generated. Okay, 1 year after whichever is later, the 30 days or the 120 days. Okay, just want to make sure that that's pointed out. Now, so having said all of that, I want to point out something else, that HR 40 is the brainchild of John Conyers. Okay, again, he submitted back in 1989. At first, it wasn't called HR 40 again. It was called HR 3745. So again, if you want to look that up, that's what you're going to have to look up. And he submitted it to raise the question of reparations and the issue of reparative justice for the institution of slavery and its vestiges on a national level. And he said he did it on in this venue appropriately because of an effort not to allow these discussions to be a wedge between the country and so on and so forth. So it needs to be raised as a national conversation. And so respectfully, the bill asked simply for it to be studied and utilize the resources that the government has to actually perform the study and to protect it and actually execute it. Along with the study, based on its findings from the study, to also include recommendations. So it's not just a study, it's also to provide recommendations. All right, just want that to be clear. Now, that in and of itself is not something that's special. It's not rocket science. It's not something that we should pause and cheer about to request this kind of thing. Think about it. If your car breaks down, you have a problem. What is the first thing you're going to do about your problem, which is your car being broke down? What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to take it to a mechanic who's going to do what? They're going to hook your car up to a diagnostic computer or machine or what have you. I'm not a mechanic, so I don't know the details. But my point is that every problem, the first step towards a solution is to analyze the problem or diagnose the injury. Diagnose the problem. So it is in the common sense normal course of problem solving that your first step is to study something, diagnose something, investigate something, examine something. So HR 40 in and of itself is a normal request. It's not something that it takes a rocket scientist to come up with. It's not something that it's not something that's special. It's something that is in the normal course of examining a problem. You have to study it. And the reason why I'm saying that is because as of lately, you have another distraction going on where people are pitting the ADOS advocacy movement against an organization called INCOBRA. And people are saying that INCOBRA is responsible for having input into this HR 40 bill. And ADOS doesn't. Therefore, INCOBRA is the real reparations movement, and ADOS is hijacking it. And that is the most ridiculous thing that anybody could say. And it's very distractive and disruptive to the progress that's being made. All right? Because, again, this bill in and of itself is a common sense, normal request in the process of problem solving. HR 40 is fully supported by the ADOS movement. And rightfully so, because this is the normal starting of any pathway towards a solution, is to examine the problem. So ADOS, hashtag ADOS, is in full support of HR 40. And COBRA is in full support of HR 40. And you have other organizations that are in full support of HR 40. So instead of the distractive conversation of who did what first and which one is the real movement, who's hijacking what, and the third, there should be some synergy going on between these organizations, because all of them support the common sense, and I have to emphasize this is common sense request to study. The difference of HR 40, though, is that it brings it to a national level, and it ensures its execution by it being a bill passed into law. But the actual content or what's being requested is a normal thing. It's normal. All right, it's not special. This, and people are trying to make it special to use this mischaracterizing of it being something special to set up this dichotomy between organizations against a movement, such as INCOBRA versus ADOS and this and that. And we have to really, really stop that. All right. So again, I'm trying to keep this video brief, but I'm not doing a very good job of it. But I just wanted to kind of lay those couple of things out. First of all, what is HR 40? HR 40 is not reparations itself. It is a bill that will, if enacted, it will establish a commission to study the effects of slavery and all of its vestiges, because it's ... It's more than just chattel slavery. And also to make recommendations. And you can find the summary of it in the first paragraph, as I read earlier. Okay. Another thing about HR 40, it is very specific. It's talking about African Americans who are descendants of enslaved Africans. It's talking about a specific case in a specific place in the colonies, which we don't have anymore, that became the United States of America, which is what we're currently dealing with. It's talking about United States of America. It's not talking about Haiti. It's not talking about Jamaica. It's not talking about Trinidad and Tobago. It's not talking about any of the Caribbean nations. It's not talking about any of the 54 nations on the continent of Africa. It's not talking about any of the diasporic people of African descent that live in the UK or in Germany or in the European nations. It's not talking about that. Okay? It's very specific. This mirrors and mimics what is being advocated by the ADOS movement. Now, briefly, one of the major differences, I want to say difference because it's not different. One of the things that stick out with the ADOS movement is what it is. It's an advocacy movement. It's not an organization. You're not going to pay some dues and fill out an application to become a member or to become a chapter somewhere in some state or whatever the case is. It is an advocacy movement, an education and advocacy movement. Okay? And more appropriately, it's an education and political advocacy movement, because it educates people on the data and the facts that supports the case for reparations. And also, it's not sitting on its hands. It's not waiting for HR 40. HR 40 has been on the books for 32 years. 89 to 30 years. Let's just say 30 years. 30 years. 89 to 2019, for 30 years. All right. We now have a surge of conversations that are dealing with reparations thanks to the ADOS movement. Period. Even people who are opposed to the ADOS movement, in their opposition, in their conversations in opposition to ADOS, it's forcing them to even talk about reparations. The intense discussions about reparations that's going on right now is a direct result of the ADOS advocacy movement. Period. And so we have to move away from the distractions, move away, because all of the distractions are based on emotions, personal dislikes, likes and dislikes, and people's prerogatives of what people want and wish and all of this, and not the data and not the actual issues. All right. So keep that in mind, and let's get on code, because we need all of the people on board with this justice claim, because we're already traveling uphill. Everybody who's already familiar with HR 40 knows that it's been on the books for 30 years. That's 3 decades. 3 decades. Whether the Democrats have controlled the House or not, HR 40 has not made it out of committee. Has not received traction. You can go back through the history of its sponsorship and co-sponsors. You can see the numbers fluctuate. One year it'll be 30 co-sponsors. Another time it'll be 20. Another time it'll be 25, et cetera, et cetera. We had Democrats controlling the House. We even had Democratic presidents. And on top of that, we've had a quote unquote our first black president, not serving 1 term, mind you, 2 terms, not just 4 years, 8 years. And HR 40 still did not get any traction. So this is what we're up against. So the bickering that's going back and forth is sabotage. It's self-sabotaging. It is truly the epitome of self-sabotage. The bickering back and forth, the talking about this and that, and it's talking around the issues, not even the issues themselves. It is self-sabotaging. And we don't have any time for that. This is serious. This is not some 125th Street rap battle debate type of conversation that people are making it out to be. This is a very serious issue. It's a national issue, and it involves millions of people. And on top of that, it is talking about reparative justice for the world's for an atrocity that has affected the entire world, and specifically the victims who were transported and brought here from the continent of Africa and are part and parcel of these atrocities, victims of it. And it became the shoes or the boots upon which wealth was created and generated within this country, and responsible for this country being the country that it is and its superpower that it is today. Our ancestors who were brought here and forced into labor, based on their forced labor, is what made that happen. And so the bickering is a disrespect to that, to gaining justice for that. Think about it. It's like irrelevant. It's something that's not necessary. And so anyway, I'm just going to conclude with what I wanted to address in terms of HR 40, but I'm going to look at a couple of the comments and see if anything is if I can address anything or what have you. So again, I do appreciate you all tuning in live. I wanted to kind of talk about this, discuss this in a video, so I can have somewhere where I can just link people to have this understanding, so I don't have to keep repeating myself and keep typing the same things over and over again. All right, so let me just take some time out to go over some of these comments. Wow. Okay, you all have been chatting up a storm. So let me kind of quickly go through these things. Again, I appreciate anybody who's tuned in. If you disagree with anything that I've said, I don't mind having that conversation, but it's just that I want to keep this video as short as possible. But I do want to entertain a couple of questions if I can. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, and notice the brother Sean says teachers teach. And notice this is what I'm doing. See, this is the thing. You got to be careful of people who use their platforms to intensify their personal biases that really are irrelevant. All right, we have a lot of that going on right now. Okay, if they're not teaching, if they're not edifying, if they're not educating you, then just be mindful of that. Just take it for what it is. It's just entertainment. It's just a person's opinion. And we have to remember that opinions, everybody has them. And if it's not based in fact or based on information, then it's an uninformed opinion. And you can't be swayed by that. All right, stay on code and just stay the course. Do your own due diligence. All right. Again, so just real quick, what I'm sharing here it can be found at the congress.gov website. Actually, I'll edit the description to this video and I'll put these links there. All right. So I'll make it easy for everyone. All right. I'll do that. And that will kind of cut to the chase. All right. I'll put that in and so people can come straight to this page, read it for yourself, and so on. All right, so let me keep going. Let's see. Kennedy Cameron, we got to stay on message. Okay, yes, we have to. Chris, does ADOS politics in Sacramento? Thanks for doing. Okay, no problem. All right, let's see. Please just, okay, let's see. If they aren't included, not solely for money. Yeah, that's another point. If you're making that point, HR 40, remember, reparations is not a, now listen, I did it. There's another video on my channel where I address what reparations is. It's not just money. Money is the compensation part of it, but you have restitution. You have 5 major elements of reparations. Okay, money is not it. So all those people who just think money, look, we gotta expand. We gotta expand. We need policies, programs, and set asides, not just money. Now it costs money to do those things, but people are not even thinking about that. They're thinking about just getting a check, and reparations is much more than that. All right, so gotta keep that in mind. I'm gonna try to quickly go through this. Bro, we are for reparations for Black Americans, but stop the folly. Okay, see, again, that, people that make those comments, it says, bro, we are for reparations for Black Americans, but stop the folly. Well, I mean, let me take your comment as in agreement to what I'm saying, because I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying let's stay focused on the real issues and let's stop the folly. Let's stop all the fake hate. Let's stop all the excuse making, because people will create excuses to not support something. All right, and that's what is going on. So I'm going to take your comment as that, and I'm going to say I agree with you. I agree with you. All right, let's stay on focus and let's stop the folly. Smokey Kieta, ADOS has not made it clear what their agenda is. HR 40 is the lead to the pathway for reparations. That's not true. ADOS has made clear what the agenda is. They have a website and they have a page specifically that says the Black Agenda. And the advocates, the main 2 advocates for ADOS movement, the founders of this recent movement, Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell, they have over 400 hours of videos. So they have information spread out over 400 hours worth of videos that discuss the data and issues and issue after issue. So the agenda is clear. It's an advocacy movement. Remember, the movement itself is about education and advocacy. The agenda, there's an agenda on the website. The agenda is for demands made or impressed upon the people who are qualified to actually execute them, which is the legislative branch of government. All right, people have to understand that. All right, so let's see. Are you saying that as okay? See, there's maybe some conversations that's going on in the chat. I'm trying to just skip. So if I missed your question, I apologize. I'm just trying to quickly go down to see if there are any questions. Let's see. Afro-Jamaicans are not African Americans. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to just keep going. Keep going. Yeah. Random lessons. Okay. Someone said, "Oh, shut up, Wujao. United States is the leader in the destabilization of third world countries." See, this is okay. Let me address that comment. I'm gonna read it again. It says, this is from Gideon Block. It says, "Oh, shut up, Wujao. United States is the leader in the destabilization of third world countries." Now, he said that, he must have said that, he or she must have said that when I was talking about the United States is one of the in the forefront of seeking reparative justice for other situations around the world. So instead of addressing that, see, this is what's called a logical fallacy. When you're taking something totally different and you're discussing that and not addressing actually what I said, it is a known fact that the United States postures itself as a defender of humanity and humanitarian issues around the world. You see it all the time. The United States has even used its military for this end. Now, this is the posture. This is what is projected out there. Now, the results of it as being disruptive and doing X, Y, and Z is another thing. But you cannot ignore that the United States prides itself and positions and postures itself as being the world's police when it comes to humanitarian issues or injustices against humanity. Like you would literally have to live on another planet not to see that and understand that that is the posture that the United States projects. That's what I was speaking to. All right. That's what I was speaking to. And people have to understand that. All right. Just want to reiterate that. All right. Not to mention that it's just rude to tell somebody to shut up and everything. See, we have to be very mature, and I do understand that you know, the internet, we have all kinds of age groups, all kinds of people of all kinds of backgrounds and everything, and that's the nature of social media, and we can't allow the immaturity of people to also fuel the deflection and the distractions. All right, so this is but I did want to address that comment because we have to really understand what's being said. And it's those kinds of things that will lead us down the path of just gossipy, shallow, petty conversations. And we don't need that. All right. Let's see. Let's keep going. Keep going. I'm just skipping down. Let's see. Let's keep going. I'm sorry. I'm looking for any questions or any worthwhile comments. I'm skipping down. And yeah, everyone's having a conversation within the chat. So listen, I hope everyone heard what I said, understands the points I'm making in this video, understand what HR 40 is now. And if you still don't, again, I'm going to put the link where you can read it for yourself. It's not very long. Let me scroll to the bottom, just show you how brief it is. All right, here's the bottom. It's only 8 sections, and it's written in bullet form, in the bullet form per section, subsections, and so on and so forth. So it's easy to follow. It's easy to read. There's words that should be very familiar to people, and of course, you can look up any words that you may not be familiar with. But it shouldn't go over anybody's heads. But just follow it. Just read it. All right. And it could be summarized within the first paragraph that I read. This paragraph here. All right, and remember the point that I'm making. I'm making that HR 40 is supported all across the board, but it's never characterized as being divisive. It's never characterized as being something to criticize, as being too narrow, too shallow. Why doesn't it deal with Africans in the diaspora? Why doesn't it deal with the global case? And all this and that. It's not being criticized that way, but ADOS is, and ADOS is saying the same thing HR 40 is saying. But of course, HR 40 is simply a bill on paper, whereas ADOS movement is an advocacy movement and an educational movement. So it's educating you on the details. It's actually doing the work. It's actually crunching the numbers. It's actually showing you, keeping up in real time, addressing the politics right now. It's about politics 101, black politics 101, black politics 102, and law. All right. So, let me keep on scrolling. Let's see. Just want to keep on going. I know this video ended up being a little long. Let's keep going a little bit. Just looking for any questions. And I guess it really shouldn't be any questions. I mean, I haven't said anything that would really warrant a question. It's pretty straightforward. I see that everybody's having a conversation within the chat. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. And again, I appreciate those who have tuned in. As I'm talking, I'm still trying to scroll. All right. ADOS has to fight everyone. The U.S. is the segregated reparations capital of the world. All right. Okay. So anyway, I will wrap this up. Again, I appreciate those of you who tuned in. Please share this. If you see any discussions about HR 40 and you see some confusion regarding it, make sure you point to people to the source. I always tell people, because see, I'm no one special. I hope to pride myself on my abilities to read and comprehend and listen and comprehend. My reading and listening comprehension skills, I trust them, and I try to explain things where necessary. Me being a teacher in many different other areas, I wear my teaching hat a lot and try to edify and clarify things. And so that's what I'm doing here. But ultimately, people will have to do their due diligence and they have to research. So I'm providing the source where you can read up on it. This is the official digital documentation of what HR 40 is, how it looks on the books. Currently, it is in committee. And that's another thing. I heard, or I'm hearing people say that, hey, you need 100 co-sponsors or 50 co-sponsors on the bill for it to hit the floor, or something along that kind of language. And again, listen, I encourage people to do their own due diligence. Now that reparations is being discussed, we have people who are doing, I guess, what I'm doing. They're trying to explain things, or maybe not. A lot of people are discouraging, and fueling the gossip and fueling the what people are claiming being divisive. But you have the divisive claimers being the device itself, the divisiveness itself. And it's really, really, really crazy. But I'm going to post up or share another link. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull it up on the screen real quick just to show it to you all. This is another page that should be of importance when having these discussions. All right, it's coming from the same website, congress.gov. And if you see it on the screen, it is called How Our Laws Are Made. Learn about the legislative process. Okay, this is the official educational place to go when you want to learn about how laws are made and about the legislative process. Okay, again, this is on the same website, congress.gov. And you see the table of contents. It talks about Congress itself. What is Congress? The sources of legislation, the forms of congressional action, bills. And when you drill down into these things, it explains each thing very well. Okay. How bills are the difference of action through bills, joint resolutions, concurrent resolutions, simple resolutions. And what we've been discussing are bills, which is what HR 40 is. It's a bill, which is why HR 40 at the very top of it, you see in big bold letters, a bill. If it was something else, it would be something else stated right here. It would say joint resolution or something to that nature here. But it clearly defines itself as a bill. And so you see bill here and you click on it and you go through. It goes over the introduction and referral to a committee, which is what HR 40 has already been done. Then considerations by the committee meetings, public hearings. Now, public hearings, let me click on this real quick. If we go to public hearings, it says, if the bill is of sufficient importance, the committee may set a date for public hearings. The chairman of each committee, except for the committee on rules, is required to make public announcements of the date, place, and subject matter of any hearings at least 1 week before the commencement of that hearing, unless the committee chairman, with the concurrence of the ranking minority member of the committee by majority vote, determines that there is no good cause to begin the hearing at an earlier date. In other words, all of that to say is that what makes ADOS movement very, very important is the education part of it and the advocacy part of it, because as you educate yourself, you'll be abreast on all of the issues and points. Then as an advocate, you will make sure you keep your finger on the pulse, and any public hearings, whether it's televised on C-SPAN, whether it's televised or not, or you are physically located to where you can attend these public meetings, then you'll be more compelled to participate and to stay abreast on these things and you know, have some say so and educate yourself to be able to know where this is going and the direction it's going, to know how to adjust your advocacy, how to adjust the things that we are saying and demanding, and so on and so forth. All right. So we need to really, really educate ourselves on this process. And that's not an easy task, because we have a history of being apolitical as a people. Black America has given up on politics a long time ago. And for the most part, in general, we have been non-participants. Even though voting was fought for and sacrificed for, we would have to really be honest with ourselves and say that we have been neglectfully participating in politics. And those of us who did or do participate, we've been doing so from a vulnerable position of ignorance, because we haven't been really keeping up with politics in general, at large, Black America. All right. We have historically voted Democrat. When we go to the polls, we may know the presidential candidates and what they've been talking about, but all the other people that you know you vote for and whatnot, a lot of people have been voting just because they have a D next to their name as a Democrat, or if their name looks like an African American name, or so on and so forth. We've been voting based on color, skin color. We've been voting based on party, but we have not, in a grand scale, been voting based on policy, based on programs. Okay. And that's what we have to get towards. All right. And remember that your vote. Now, I plan to discuss this in a separate video, and I'm going to end with this. That voting in politics is different than voting, let's say, for the Grammys or the Oscars. Political voting is an exchange. The other types of voting, there's no exchange there. You're voting for a winner of a singing contest or the Oscars or the Grammys. You're voting based on their talent, but it's not an exchange there. Political voting, you're not voting for someone's talent. Your vote is in exchange for someone to address your interest and collectively our interest. And so you use your votes in politics as leverage. It's different than voting, in other scenarios and other contexts. So keep that in mind. So the whole idea now is that we collectively, we're tired of allowing our votes to be taken for granted. We are demanding things in return. We're demanding things in return for our vote. And that demand is getting greater and greater and greater with more and more people on board. And these distractive conversations about Cobra versus ADOS, Yvette's being too light-skinned, Antonio, whatever people say about him, and whether it's anti-African or anti-Pan-African, all realize that I don't care how you feel about that and how maybe disrespected you may feel that someone did or said. At the very least, realize that all of that is a distraction. The real issue is for us to be on one page here in America on code with what we're demanding, so that our vote equals that demand, and that demand is leveraged, or the vote is leveraged against our demand. And whoever is running, we will be able to push our weight around, our voting weight around, our demand weight around. All right. So anyway, I'll end there. And again, I appreciate all of those who have tuned in, and I hope you got some form of education from what I discussed. And if not, we can continue the conversation. I'm going to be going live again on this channel periodically to continue this conversation in hopes to clarify and set aside the petty fussing that people are doing and really stay on point. All right. So I just want to reemphasize that. And again, thanks for those who are tuned in, and keep the conversation going on the right points. All right. So I'll say peace to everyone.